why am I interested in science beats? I started to become interested in journalism as a physics student who was not really succeeding, and I liked writing, and I had the chance to do an internship with one of the big newspapers in Germany, in Frankfurt, Frankfurter Rundschau, and on my first days there, I walked along the couloir and saw all these well, very much like this building, but it was a little round. So you would walk from one door to the next, and it would say national politics, international politics, economy, and you walk, you keep walking, and it goes round. You think you walk around the earth, and then you see sports, culture, local, where I started. It still goes on. There's smaller departments like travel, and then there's cars, and at the very end, there's science. And you think, my goodness, the whole world, is condensed in this building, and I'm part of this. It's how does this work? How does this work? So that's one of my main questions. I mean, as a physics student, I always felt I was an observer. I never really belonged to the physics community, but I liked physicists. I liked the way they thought and worked, and that's what made me a good physics reporter, maybe because I understand and like these people, but I never went too far into following them and understanding what they do. And in a way, this observing position is one I also have in journalism. Although I'm a journalist myself, I do sometimes observe myself and my own actions, and I certainly observe my colleagues, what they do. And then you, being a journalist that has some experience, you look at the literature in communication science, and you realize these people are only talking about individual journalists. Especially the old literature, this. It's always the ideal of a journalist, what he should be doing. It's writing, being ethically, morally right, doing, having all the abilities of a great intellectual. But the truth is, journalism is about organization. It's of course it's about writing. It's about being intellectual. But it is a lot about how do we coordinate our work in a team. And this you learn very quickly in your first internship. And actually, from one internship you jump to the next internship. And I did lots of internships to learn more and more. And everywhere people did a different form of journalism. And I find this very exciting to understand how is journalism organized. So this is why science journalism to me is how do you organize a science beat? And what effect does this organization have on the output? I don't really care so much for people who only analyze the content of journalistic articles and say, oh, they made this mistake and this could be covered better and this is not well written. I also would like to stress there is some organizational background to why articles are better or worse, or why certain newspapers are good and others are not as good. Right, so I will be speaking about change in newsrooms, about organizational theory, tell you a little about newsroom research in that area. I will then introduce you to the main concept I propose in my new paper of 4 ideal types of science beats. So I will propose to you there are 4 ideal types, and all the science beats somehow are in the middle between them. And I have a lot of conclusions for specialized journalism. I understand that your faculty is certainly has a focus with the chair on science journalism, but it also supports education in specialized journalism. And for me, science journalism is just a test case for one possibility of specialized journalism. And there's many other specializations, and I'll discuss with you then also the importance of journalism education in this area. That will be the first part. We'll then discuss, but please feel free to interrupt me anytime. I don't mind discussions. Then we'll have a longer discussion at the end of this talk, and then I will jump to something completely different and talk about the Scoop mentoring program. But there, I will also try to introduce the notion of newsroom and organizational questions. So to somehow bridge between the things I've done in Germany and the things we're doing now in trying to understand now in Africa. Right. The science beat is a difficult case. I told you in my introductory story, that it's at the very end of the couloir. Sometimes it's even in another building. The leading newspaper in Germany, Süddeutsche Zeitung, with a really good science page or science supplement earlier was was in an apartment 2 blocks away from the main newspaper building. So it's somehow an add-on. It came historically very late, the science beat. And that's why many communication scientists in Germany at least say it has come historically late and has thus remained small because the other beats grew earlier. Like if you call it an evolutionary process, the others were there, and then there was not much space left for science reporting. Many people say these people are not qualified for 2 reasons. They don't really know about science, and the other reason is they're not really journalists. They're people who did physics and then didn't know where to go, and they ended up in the newspaper. Yeah? You can find this in the literature, these kind of arguments. People state that the science beat has very little power. If you want to make a career in journalism, don't go to the science beat. It's politics, where you can really advance. And if you want, if it's journalism organizations are about power too, of course. And when it comes to power, it's not the science editor that has a lot of power in many cases. That's what the literature states. It might change in some cases. So there's this quote of beat in a ghetto. So if they live in their own small world. They look at the nature and science publications and have some funny animal stories, and they're somewhere at the end of the newspaper, right? But this situation changes dramatically in the past 10 or 20 years with the new information technology, with the notion of newsrooms where everybody's in one big room, where suddenly people are forced to collaborate in new ways. So you can't just fill your small page or do your small radio program on Sunday afternoon when nobody listens to the radio. Suddenly you have to be involved and do the morning program, submit to the morning television as a science editor. When everybody watches, of course, we talk about Japan, and all the science editors, all my colleagues in Germany, and here the same. They don't sleep at the moment. They have to produce, and they have an enormous demand. And it's not for their small science show, but it's for the morning programs or for the front page news every day. How do you fill this? And this is now also made possible through these different new routines of job division, new work practices in these large newsrooms with all the computer aid and so on. But this change towards new structures has also meant less departments. So there's, of course, whenever structures change, bosses also want to save money, or many do, fortunately not all. And so they use this to reduce the number of departments or beats. And there's quite a few editors-in-chief who say the all-round journalist is the best journalist, somebody who can do anything, anywhere, under any condition. So the number of beats has decreased. But as I said, there's also the advantage of the science journalist being pushed into the main headlines, into the competition with their colleagues from other beats. Okay, I already mentioned some dangers. There's loss of science beats in many cases. And CNN has completely, sacked the whole science beat a few years, 2 or 3 years ago. There's several cases of science beats also in Germany. Editor-in-chief says, "We don't need you. That's it." They go up. They might, if they're kind, they say, "Why don't you join the culture reporters and you can write about quantum mechanics once in a while?" It's like this kind of, or the environmental editor will join the economy team and so on. We see this a lot, I think, all over America and Europe. This means that science journalists who don't have their regular page are losing continuity. They cannot continuously follow up on something. They cannot decide for themselves, I want to do this story even if it's not so interesting to my editor-in-chief, but I can do it on my page, and I can keep in touch with these scientists and so on. If this is lost, then they lose their ability to continuously report on certain issues that might not yet be of interest to the main public. But if a science editor has been able to keep up with the nuclear reactor community over the past years, he will now, in this situation that we see now, have much better possibilities to report if he has already built relationships. But most people have no relationships whatsoever to the nuclear research industry or the risk community. And then, of course, they're in a very difficult position. What also happens a lot is that, of course, the media generally are in difficult times, that science journalism is mixed with public relations and sometimes with entertainment, but probably the mix with public relations is the most difficult, problematic one, especially on TV. Many science broadcasts that you see on TV are funded by either by companies who want to sell their products or by science foundations who want to sell their science, and the journalists just take the material basically. So there is this sense. The question: there are many people who speak about a crisis in science journalism over the past 3-4 years. There's been several articles on this in Nature. Communication scientists have actually studied it. Bauer and Howard have asked at the World Conference of Science Journalists in 2009 the question to the, I think, 1,000 participants or so. I don't know if they got questionnaires from all of them, but it's a pretty large number of journalists being interviewed. Do you feel there's a crisis? And 1/3 of them said, yes, we feel there's a crisis in science journalism. So it's not the majority, but it's a large portion. 2/3 bemoan that the standards have been lowered. They say there's a lot of reproduction of press releases. It's copy and paste journalism that is done in science journalism nowadays, because the few people that still have a job have very little time to write something on their own, and they just copy material across in many cases.